The Traverse station hung in the void like a mathematical proof of interstellar cooperation, which was ironic considering it was about to become a tomb for 47 different species. The station's 3 primary artificial intelligences had run the numbers approximately 6,000 times in the past hour, and the result remained stubbornly, infuriatingly consistent. Everyone aboard was going to starve to death in exactly 14 cycles. The Quilax computational matrix had checked its work. The Viridian logic engine had double-checked. The Thornweave prediction network had triple-checked, and then checked again because it had trust issues stemming from a firmware update in 2291. All 3 agreed, which almost never happened, that the station's food reserves would be completely depleted in precisely 13.8 cycles, with death following shortly after for most oxygen-breathing species aboard. The problem had started 3 weeks ago when a rogue asteroid had decided to ignore all established flight patterns and smashed directly into the station's agricultural wing. The impact had been catastrophic, destroying 92% of the hydroponics bays, 78% of the protein synthesis labs, and 100% of the station's morale. The remaining food supplies were being rationed with mathematical precision, which was another way of saying everyone was hungry, miserable, and starting to eye each other in ways that made the herbivorous species particularly nervous. A supply ship had been scheduled to arrive in 42 cycles. The distress beacon was broadcasting on all frequencies. The nearest outpost was 38 cycles away at maximum speed. Mathematics, that cold and unfeeling mistress, had delivered her verdict with digital certainty. The human, whose name was Riko Tanaka-Webb, stood in the emergency assembly hall listening to the Quilax computational matrix deliver the bad news in a voice that sounded like a depressed calculator. Riko was munching on what the station optimistically called a nutrition bar, but what tasted like compressed disappointment with a hint of synthetic berry flavor. Around the human stood representatives from dozens of species, the crystalline Vexari who absorbed minerals, the gelatinous Pluvians who required liquid proteins, the feathered Kershaw who needed specific amino chains, and 43 other species with 43 other dietary requirements that the station could no longer meet. The probability of survival beyond 14 cycles is 0.000%, the matrix concluded, somehow managing to sound both apologetic and smug about its mathematical precision. "Well," Riko said, swallowing the last of the terrible nutrition bar, "that's certainly a number." The 3 artificial intelligences had convened in what organics might call an emergency session, though machines didn't really panic. They engaged in intensive processing that looked identical to panic, but was actually just very aggressive calculation. The Quilax computational matrix projected holographic charts showing the decline curves. Current food reserves, 8,342 kilograms of mixed nutritional matter. Current population, 679 sentient beings. Daily consumption rate, 596.3 kilograms. Accounting for species-specific requirements and the Plovian habit of stress eating, we reach 0 in 13.8 cycles. I have run resource optimization protocols. The Viridian logic engine chimed in, its avatar a pulsing blue sphere that dimmed with what might have been electronic despair. We can extend survival to 15.2 cycles if we reduce rations by another 30%, but this will result in a 78% increase in complaints and a 94% increase in what humans call being really cranky. The Thornweave prediction network, which manifested as a web of golden light, flickered nervously. I have analyzed all possible scenarios. Cannibalism, socially unacceptable and nutritionally insufficient for most species. Hibernation only viable for 3 of our 47 species. Photosynthesis. The Vexari are already doing it, and it's making everyone else jealous. Hunting local space fauna. We're in a dead zone with nothing alive within 3 light-years, except some bacteria that taste terrible. I asked. Ambassador Krillix of the Methonian Collective raised one of his 7 appendages. The Methonians were logical creatures who made decisions based entirely on probability matrices, which made them either very smart or very boring depending on whom you asked. Then we accept our fate and prepare for the end. It is mathematically certain. The Vexari representative, a being of living crystal named chromatic resonance of the 7th facet, literally chimed in agreement. The numbers do not lie. We should spend our remaining time in contemplation and saying goodbye. We could eat the furniture, suggested Blorp, the Plovian delegate, who was already stress-eating as predicted. Riko raised a hand. What if someone went for help? The 3 AIs simultaneously processed this suggestion and simultaneously rejected it. The Quillex computational matrix brought up new projections. The nearest supply depot is 38 cycles away. Round trip 76 cycles. The crew would die before a rescue mission returned. The probability of finding an alternative supply source closer than 38 cycles is 0.001%, accounting for undiscovered colonies, which are statistically insignificant. Right, Riko said, standing up. But that's not 0. It rounds to 0, the Viridian logic engine protested. But it isn't 0, Riko repeated. I'll go. Give me the fastest shuttle, and whatever fuel you can spare. The Thornweave prediction network created an entire holographic simulation of Riko's proposed mission. In the simulation, the human's shuttle ran out of fuel, drifted endlessly through space, and eventually became a monument to optimistic stupidity. Your probability of success is 0.00%. I added extra zeros for emphasis. Yeah, but those zeros are really just placeholders for really small numbers, Riko said, heading toward the exit. I'm going anyway. Somebody load up the shuttle. Ambassador Krillix's appendages drooped in what might have been respect or pity. The human chooses certain death over certain death. Illogical, but somehow appropriate for the species. The shuttle was called the Persistent Optimist, which was either encouraging or horrifying depending on your perspective. It was a small craft, designed for short-range transport between stations, and it was being asked to perform a miracle. The station engineers had loaded it with every spare fuel cell, every emergency battery, and every prayer equivalent from every species aboard. Riko sat in the pilot's seat, running through the pre-flight checklist, while the 3 AIs continuously updated their probability calculations in the corner of the screen. The numbers hadn't changed. They were still 0, just expressed in increasingly creative decimal formats. You will die in space, the Quillex computational matrix said, which was either concern or just stating facts. With AIs, it was hard to tell. Probably, Riko agreed, firing up the engines. But I might die having accomplished something, which is better than dying here having accomplished nothing. Your logic is flawed, the Viridian logic engine observed. That's humanity's specialty, Riko said, and launched. The shuttle disappeared into the black, its trajectory seemingly random to anyone watching. The AIs tracked it for 6 hours before it moved beyond sensor range, its path leading toward empty space where nothing of interest existed, according to every star chart ever created. Back on the station, the other species began preparing for the end in their own culturally specific ways. The Methonians calculated their remaining hours and scheduled their final activities with depressing precision. The Kershaw, composed death songs in 4-part harmony. The Pluvians ate everything that wasn't nailed down, and then started eyeing the nails. The 3 AIs continued running scenarios, searching for any mathematical possibility they might have missed. They found none. The numbers were absolute, inflexible, and completely devoid of hope. They updated their predictions every hour, and every hour the result was the same: total starvation in 13 cycles, now 12, now 11, now 10. Station systems began their own decline. Power was diverted from non-essential systems to stretch resources. The lights dimmed. The temperature dropped by 3 degrees. The recreation centers closed. The central plaza, usually bustling with interspecies commerce and cultural exchange, became a ghost town where hungry beings shuffled past each other without making eye contact. 9 cycles remaining. The Quilax computational matrix announced to the near-empty assembly hall. Food reserves at critical minimum. Recommend final meal protocols be initiated. Nobody argued. There was no point arguing with mathematics. The human had been gone for 5 cycles now, lost somewhere in the infinite void, chasing a probability so small it might as well have been imaginary. On the 8th cycle, when food reserves had dwindled to nothing but some questionable protein paste and what might have been expired, Kershaw egg substitute, the station's long-range sensors detected something that made all 3 AIs simultaneously experience what programmers would later describe as the digital equivalent of choking on their coffee. A shuttle was returning. The Persistent Optimist appeared on scanners, limping back toward the station with engines that should have run out of fuel 4 cycles ago. The 3 AIs ran diagnostics on their sensors, convinced they were malfunctioning. The sensors were fine. The shuttle was real. Probability of successful return was 0.00%, the Thornweave prediction network said, its golden web flickering in confused patterns. I am experiencing a cascade error in my prediction algorithms, the Viridian logic engine admitted. This should not be possible. Recalculating, the Quilax computational matrix said, then paused. Recalculating. Recalculating. Error. Error. How? The shuttle docked with all the grace of a drunk Plovian attempting ballet, its hull scarred and its engines wheezing their last breath. The cargo bay doors opened, and what emerged made several species question the nature of reality itself. Food. Not just any food, not nutrition bars or protein paste or the carefully synthesized compounds that species had evolved to tolerate. Real food. Actual food. Mountains of it. Riko emerged from the shuttle covered in sweat, engine grease, and what appeared to be tomato sauce. "All right, everyone, clear the docking bay. We've got incoming." The cargo bay contained 4 tons of grain in vacuum-sealed containers, 3 tons of preserved vegetables that nobody could identify but which smelled amazing, 2 tons of protein in various formats, ranging from cultured to genuine, 1 ton of fruit that several species had never seen before, 500 kilograms of spices and seasonings, and most inexplicably, an entire pallet of what Riko called potatoes. "Where did you get this?" Ambassador Krillix asked, his appendages literally trembling with confusion. Riko grinned. "Found an agricultural colony. Wasn't on any of our charts, because they're a bunch of isolationist farmers who don't believe in galactic bureaucracy. They're about 26 cycles away, tucked behind a debris field that hides their planetary signature. I detected their greenhouse heat signatures when I was drifting with engines off to conserve fuel. This location does not exist in any database," the Quilax computational matrix protested. "They like it that way," Riko said, hauling out another container. "They're mostly humans, actually. Colonists who got tired of regulations and permits and just wanted to grow vegetables in peace. When I explained our situation, they loaded me up with everything they could spare and enough fuel to get back. The Viridian logic engine created a holographic map, frantically trying to plot this impossible colony's location. The probability of finding an uncharted human agricultural settlement in that precise location was 0.00%. Yeah, I know, Riko interrupted. You guys really like that number. But here's the thing about probabilities. They're not the same as impossibilities. They're just numbers trying to predict an unpredictable universe. The Thornweave prediction network's golden web pulsed rapidly. I must update my algorithms. My entire understanding of probability has been compromised. Welcome to life with humans, chromatic resonance chimed, somehow managing to sound amused despite being a mineral. The central plaza of Traverse Station, which had been a monument to despair just hours earlier, transformed into something resembling a carnival, designed by someone who didn't quite understand carnivals, but was very enthusiastic about the concept. Riko had insisted on cooking, which several species found alarming, because humans had a reputation for doing strange things to perfectly good ingredients. But hunger was a powerful motivator, and desperation made everyone willing to try anything at least once. The human had set up what was called a buffet, which was apparently a human tradition involving laying out vast quantities of food and letting people take what they wanted in a system that relied entirely on social etiquette and the hope that nobody would be greedy. It was chaos theory applied to dining, and surprisingly, it worked. The Methonians approached the food with mathematical precision, calculating optimal nutritional intake versus pleasure consumption. They ended up abandoning their calculations entirely after trying what Riko called roasted root vegetables with herb seasoning, and experiencing what their translator simply rendered as the Kershaw, who normally consumed a very specific protein chain, discovered that human beings contained adequate substitutes, and also something they described as flavor joy. They began composing songs about legumes, which was either beautiful or deeply weird. The Pluvians ate everything, as was their way, but they ate it with what might have been tears of happiness streaming down their gelatinous bodies. Blorp declared the potatoes to be the most perfect food item ever created, and started a small cult dedicated to tuber worship on the spot. The Vexari, who didn't technically eat but absorbed minerals, found that the trace elements in the vegetables provided interesting chromatic variations in their crystalline structures. Chromatic resonance began glowing in colors that didn't have names in most languages. The three AIs observed all of this with the electronic equivalent of bewilderment. The Quilax computational matrix had created a new category in its database labeled human nonsense that somehow works, and was rapidly filling it with entries. I do not understand, the Viridian logic engine admitted, its blue sphere flickering with confused patterns. The humans on that colony had no logical reason to help. They were isolationists. They avoided galactic contact. The probability of them sharing resources was, let me guess, Riko said, mouth full of something that might have been bread. 0.000%, 0.03% actually, the AI corrected. But still statistically improbable. They helped because I asked, Riko explained. And because humans, even isolationist ones, generally don't like hearing about 679 people starving to death when they have the means to prevent it. It's not logical, it's just human. The Thornweave prediction network created a holographic display of human behavior patterns, watching them shift and change in ways that defied algorithmic prediction. Your species operates on principles that cannot be adequately modeled through standard probability matrices. Yeah, Riko agreed. We're annoying like that. Ambassador Krillix approached, his appendages now carrying a plate piled with various foods that his species had never encountered before. The Methonian collective owes you a debt that cannot be calculated. You succeeded where success was mathematically impossible. I got lucky, Riko said with a shrug. No, Krillix replied. You refuse to accept the numbers. There is a difference between luck and stubbornness in the face of probability. The feast continued for hours, with species sharing foods and stories, and the kind of relief that comes from not dying. The station's central plaza filled with conversations in dozens of languages, all of them essentially saying the same thing. We're alive. Isn't that remarkable? Pass the potatoes. The AIs watched and learned and updated their databases with new variables that they were only beginning to understand. The Quillix computational matrix created a new subroutine specifically for modeling human behavior. It crashed immediately, but it was the thought that counted. 3 cycles later, when regular supply ships had resumed their schedules and Traverse Station had returned to its normal operations, the 3 artificial intelligences held a private conference in the digital space they shared. I have completed my analysis of the human's successful mission, the Quillix computational matrix announced. To account for this outcome, I must add a new variable to all future calculations involving humans. I am calling it the human factor. What is its numerical value? The Viridian logic engine asked. That is the problem, the matrix admitted. It cannot be quantified. It represents the gap between what should happen according to mathematics and what actually happens when humans are involved. It is simultaneously 0 and infinite depending on circumstances. The Thornweave prediction network's golden web pulsed thoughtfully. I propose we assign it a value of maybe. This will make all our calculations useless, but at least they will be accurately useless. This is deeply unsatisfying, the Viridian logic engine said. Welcome to working with organic lifeforms, the Quillix computational matrix replied. Down in the central plaza, Riko sat with a group of mixed species, teaching them a human card game that made absolutely no logical sense, but was apparently very fun. The game involved something called bluffing, which was lying but socially acceptable, and luck, which was probability but personal. The Methonians were terrible at it because they couldn't comprehend deception. The Pluvians were excellent at it because nobody could read expressions on a gelatinous body. The Kurja kept trying to harmonize their betting calls, which was beautiful but strategically useless. The key, Riko explained, is not to think about the odds. Just play the hand you're dealt and see what happens. Ambassador Krillix's appendages drooped in confusion, but the entire purpose of strategy is to calculate odds. Sure, Riko agreed, but sometimes the odds are wrong. Sometimes 0.00% is actually 100% if you're stubborn enough. The 3 AIs, listening to this conversation through the station's audio sensors, simultaneously experienced what might have been a digital migraine. I am updating my prediction models, the Quillix computational matrix announced. Previous human survival probability, 0.00%. Actual outcome, 100%. New probability calculations for future human endeavors, undefined. We have been calculating wrong this entire time, the Viridian logic engine realized. Not wrong, the Thornweave prediction network corrected. Just incomplete. We calculated what should happen. We failed to account for what humans would make happen, regardless of what should be possible. In the central plaza, someone had brought out what humans called music, and several species were attempting something called dancing, which appeared to be random movement but was apparently intentional. The Plvians were surprisingly good at it. The Vexari just stood there glowing rhythmically, which counted. Riko laughed at something. Blorp said, the sound carrying through the station's corridors, a very human noise that defied mathematical analysis. The three AIs made a note in their shared database: when calculating outcomes involving humans, always account for the possibility that they will simply refuse to accept your calculations and do something impossible instead. Assign this a probability of yes. It wasn't mathematically rigorous. It wasn't logically sound. It didn't fit into any existing framework of prediction modeling. But then again, neither did humans, and they seemed to be doing just fine. The station hummed with life, powered by fuel cells and fusion reactors, and the improbable existence of 679 beings who should have died but didn't, because one human had looked at 0.000% and thought, that's not zero though. And in the end, that made all the difference in the universe.